Okay, so on this one, we're factoring by grouping. And what do we mean factoring by grouping? Well, notice how we have 4 terms, right? 4 terms. So whenever you have 4 terms like this is the first time we've had 4 terms, right? 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. 4 terms. Group 2 and 2. So I'm going to group these 2 and these 2. That's what we call a group. We make 2 separate groups. Okay, now what do I mean I'm going to group these 2? Well, I'm going to take just these 2 and say, what do they have in common? They have a y in common, don't they? And that leaves behind x squared plus 3. So I factored just those 2 so far. So that makes sense. If that y went boom and boom, it would be right back to x squared y and 3y, wouldn't it? I just took out what they had in common. They both have a y, put it in the front, removed it, brought down the x squared and the 3. Why did I do that? Well, because if you were to multiply that y, distribute that y through, it would go back. Now, how about the next 2? Then bring down that plus sign that's in between. And then do the same thing for the other 2. Say, okay, what do they have in common? They have the number 2. 2 goes into 2 and 6, doesn't it? What does that leave? X squared plus 3. You see that? 2 times x squared would go back to 2x squared, and 2 times 3 would go back to 6. How are we doing? Is that making sense? So I did 2 different groups. I grouped the first 2 and the last 2. The first 2, I took out what's in common. They both have a y. The last 2, I took out what's in common. They both have a 2. 2 goes into both of them. Now, I'm not done. Why am I not? How do you know you're not done? Because you still have a plus sign outside of parentheses. So if you have a plus or a minus sign outside of parentheses, you're not done. When we're done with the final answer, all the pluses and the minuses will be contained in parentheses. Okay, so what do we do next? So you look at these 2 terms and you say, what do they both have in common? Well, imagine, well, that's pretty obvious. They both have a parenthesis x squared plus 3, don't they? Now, as far as what you do about that, let me help. Imagine this was like a big W. What if you had YW plus 2W? What would you do? You'd say, oh, these guys both have a W, put it in the front. What does that leave? Remove it. That leaves Y plus 2, right? Because that W could go boom and be back to this and this. Well, that's exactly what we do here. Except instead of a W in the front, the W is the x squared plus 3, right? The parenthesis, x squared plus 3. That's the same as the W. And then parenthesis, remove that. What does that leave? Y plus 2. That's correct. Why is it correct? Because that whole x squared plus 3 could go boom next to the y and boom next to the 2, next to the y, next to the 2, couldn't it? And so that's it. We're done. What's the answer to this question? The answer to this question then is parenthesis x squared plus 3, parenthesis y plus 2. There we go, and we're done. Now, you might wonder, well, Mr. Heron, like one thing that might be in your mind, you might say, Mr. Heron, didn't we learn that when you have 2 things and 2 things, you do one at a time, like the x squared goes there and there, the 3 goes there and there? Yeah, you're right. And if you did that, if you took this x squared and went there and there and there and there, you would actually get these 4 terms. You could check it, that it would become these 4 terms. That's right. But I was also on this step looking at the x squared plus 3 as one big chunk. You can also do that and say, boom, that whole big chunk next to y and the big old chunk next to 2 would go back to that. You can look at it either way, as a big old chunk or as 2 separate items. And either way, it goes back to the original. So there we go. Oh, well, let me mention 2 steps again before I close this one up. So again, what do we do when we have 4 terms? We group 2 and 2. So first 2, last 2. Take out what's in common for the first 2. They both have a y. Do the parentheses. And then the last 2 goes into both 2 and 6. And then you notice they have a matching common element. Put that in the front, that x squared plus 3 in parentheses. Remove it. What are you left with? Y plus 2 in the other parenthesis. There we go.